Hello media students! In this series of videos I'm going to be talking you through how to approach the A-level media exams. Now there is so much amazing content out there on YouTube for how to get your head around the content of the course. Now lots of students think, okay, I understand the content, I can remember the content, I'm good to go for the exam, but that's doing a disservice to themselves, because once you know the content, that should essentially be the first half of your revision. The second half of your revision is then learning to apply it to the millions of different question types that the exam board can throw at you, and they do sometimes tend to, in component 2, combine different areas of the framework, which can make it quite confusing if you've learnt the content but you've not practiced applying it to these different types of questions. So that makes it quite tricky. The second thing that makes media maybe quite tricky to approach the exam initially is that the questions are so varied in length. Not so much for component 2, you've got your 15 and your 30 markers, but for component 1, you could be asked a 1-mark definition of a keyword versus a 30-mark comparison representation essay, and you've got sort of different stepped questions in section B. So how do you approach all of this? Essentially, I'm going to talk you through two things. The first thing is what you do if you get a 6 or an 8-mark question or beyond. And the second thing is different skills that you might want to try and learn that you can slot into different essays depending on what they're asking you. So with the first skill, if a question is 6 or 8 marks or above, you want to be coming up with a big idea. That is essentially another phrase for a point, a main argument. You could just list a load of content, but actually you might not be answering the question. So it's really important that when you come up with a big idea, you're rephrasing the question to give an argument. For example, if you got a question along the lines of, explain how pre-production processes shape films, refer to I, Daniel Blake. So straight away you want to be thinking, okay, how do production processes shape films, especially pre-production? You've got I, Daniel Blake with a huge amount of research that went into it, Ken Loach being instrumental in that. You want to start coming up with that big idea of what do I actually think about this topic before I start relating all the content. So that is your argument. Then once you've come up with your argument, you then want to create what is called topic sentences, which is kind of you just repeating that argument that you've made in your intro. If it's an 8-marker, the intro can literally just be your big idea. You want to repeat it a couple of times throughout your answer, just to show that you're staying on track with your argument and you're actually referring back to the question consistently. If you're going for a star, you might just want to think about when you're shaping a big idea, not just kind of thinking, okay, yes, Ken Loach did have an impact in the pre-production of I, Daniel Blake in shaping the overall film, but was that impact positive or negative? And was it a big impact or a minor impact, a small impact? So this can be a really helpful framework for thinking through how to extend a big idea beyond just the obvious and beyond just the black and white. It is kind of forcing you to be a bit more evaluative. So if you get a question that starts with the word explain, it might be an idea to almost replace it or include a how far, because then you're kind of forcing yourself to make a judgment and you might have a bit more of a precise argument. So in the case of I, Daniel Blake's pre-production process, we could argue that Ken Loach had a really positive impact in terms of the way he carried out the pre-production with Paul Laverty, the writer, Rebecca O'Brien, his sort of co-producer. You could talk about all of those, and actually he had a really huge impact on the pre-production of the film, and that is because he's an author-director, he's incredibly involved in all his projects. So when you're thinking about answering a question, it's a really good idea to practice forming big ideas, and once you've actually got those big ideas for those questions, you can just then apply them if they come up in the exam. So that's the first thing I would learn to do when you're thinking about how to apply all this content to questions. The second thing that students often find tricky is okay, I've got an 8 marker, I've got a 10 marker, I've got a 12 marker, I've got a 15 marker, I've got a 30 marker. What do I put in each question? All questions, if they're 6 or 8 marks or above, need a big idea. There are a few different skills I would argue that every question needs, which I'll talk about in later videos. However, it's an A level, you're going to have to use your brain a little bit and figure out which things are more relevant than others. So if it's an industry question, are there some bits that aren't going to be as relevant? Are you expected to analyse as much if it's an industry question? If it's a media language question, of course you're going to be doing loads of analysis. So you really need to think about what's the area of the framework I'm being asked on. It will signpost it to you in the exam, especially for component 1. And then by component 2, you'll be in year 13, so hopefully it'll be a bit more obvious. And what should I apply to it? So I've got an acronym to try and help you remember all of the possible skills you could include inside a media essay. And it's fat cats on the mic. Say again. Fat cats on the mic. I would argue if you can learn this off by heart and then practice applying it to different questions, you will start to get your head around what you need for each question. So features are just things that you are picking out from the set product to analyse. So for example, if it's Formation and her Beyonce's music video, you would maybe pick out a specific scene. That would be a feature that you're looking at. The A is analysis, talking in detail about that scene, maybe offering multiple interpretations if you're going for higher marks. Theory, really important. Even if the question doesn't directly ask you to talk about theory, having a theoretical input in your questions can just help you to think a little bit more deeply and a bit more critically about what you're analysing. So you've got those first 3. Then you've got these. They're not in any specific order, to be honest. They were just done to try and help create, like an acronym that you can remember that's a bit more sort of strange, essentially. So you've got context, the background information of that text that you're looking at. So if you were doing Formation, you would look at New Orleans, you would look at bounce music, all of those things. The audience is who is it being targeted at. That's really important to know for all your media products. Is it a mainstream audience? Is it a niche audience? Who are they actually targeting and why? That kind of links in, I guess, to the message. So again, these aren't in a specific order. Terminology. Obviously, you've got different terminology for different things. So for newspapers, you've got, your jump lines, your mastheads, your main images. So you need to know different terminology for a newspaper front cover compared to if you're analysing a music video that's unseen. You might want to talk about jump cuts, you might want to talk about different camera angles, different camera movements, different lighting, different sound. So having your terminology in and out is really important. Specifics just means knowing a little bit more about the product than the average person might. So showing excellent knowledge, and excellent is a word that's often used in the top band of the mark scheme. So having excellent knowledge means you probably know the names of all the people that are involved, specific dates perhaps, specific locations, those sorts of things. The final section, mic, links to message. Every media product that's ever produced has a message, it has something that it wants to say to the people that are receiving that media product. So considering what the intent behind it was, what the message was. That links to ideology. It's a big word, but it just kind of links into message again, and it just means a set of ideas or beliefs about the world. And you could sort of divide that into hegemonic ideology, where you're sort of reinforcing traditional worldviews, or if you're being subversive, you're kind of going against traditional Western views, for example. And finally, a slightly harder skill, and again, not always relevant. They tend to potentially ask this more in component 2 questions when they ask you to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of a theorist. But just being able to critique theory. These are people's ideas. They are not the law. They are not absolutely correct. You can sort of poke holes in them and see flaws within them, and that just signals that you are kind of working at a high level. So those are all of the skills that I would recommend learning, and when you're moving forward and starting to approach past paper questions, this is what I would practice doing, is actually forming big ideas. I hope you found that helpful and look forward to seeing you in the next video.